Bill Carroll from City 62 Media talking about the Birmingham Bowl. And of course, two teams that are in many ways are sort of mirror images, the old Spider-Man meme, when you have Georgia Tech and Vanderbilt. In Diego Pavia and Haynes King, you probably have two of the top five physically toughest quarterbacks in all of the FBS. And I remember correctly, I think Diego Pavia may have been a high school wrestling champion. If not, he probably should have been. But these are two guys that are not afraid to take a hit or give a hit. And while neither of them are pinpoint passers by any stretch of the imagination, one of these guys is going to make one or two deep shot plays down the field, and that may be one of the determining factors. These teams want to do the same thing, like pound each other, play defense, possess the ball. It's going to be really 1974 football in a lot of ways, but with some modern touches. And amongst the modern touches, of course, is the transfer portal and guys declaring early. Vanderbilt doesn't have a single player who is a guaranteed lock to be drafted, right? They have some fringe draftable prospects, but not a single one, in my mind, is a lock, 100% to be drafted, which is quite impressive when you consider how good Vanderbilt looks when you see them play on the field, which proves that coaching matters, it proves that team culture matters, and it proves, once again, toughness. It's a tough team full of tough people. Georgia Tech has a few more legitimate pro prospects, guys who are almost, once again, I won't say a lock, but are highly likely to be drafted. I'll put it that way, who are very likely to be drafted. And Haynes King probably is not one of them, or might not be one of them, and that's one of the funny things. I mean, as good as he's been, there's not really a good sense of what he is as a pro prospect yet, which is interesting to me. He might well end up playing someplace outside of the lower 48 if he wants to stay a quarterback. Is he athletic enough to project another position? But that's, I won't even start with him. Well, actually, let me rephrase. There are some players that have a shot, that do have a shot to draft. I'll start with Vanderbilt. Both teams have tight ends who have a shot to be drafted. Eli Stowers and Mr. Hawes on the other side of the ledger both have a decent shot to be day 3 selections. Stowers is I don't want to say undersized because that's going to sound, yeah, he's slightly undersized. He's probably going to play in the low 230s, 233 to 236 pounds, maybe when he shows up at the combine, somewhere in there, and probably 6'3 1/4 to 6'3 1/2. Is that tiny? No, but it's small. It is on the smaller side. By comparison, I'll just talk about George Kittle. Though he came in at 6'2 and 5/8, he was 243 or something, and he plays at about 248 to 253. He's a guy that plays in the low 250s now, but played his college career in the 240s. This is a player who's played his college career in the high 220s to low 230s. So he probably needs to get a little bit bigger. And the other players, once again, even more fringe-ish amongst Vanderbilt. There's, once again, these are guys that are on the borderline of drafted to camp invite, tryout kind of guys. And one of them that I think at least has a better than 50 chance to at least make a roster is Prince Colin. Now, he's a guy who's going to have to probably make it as a special teamer. He's a smaller linebacker, active, tough, probably about 6 feet tall, maybe 224 pounds-ish. He's probably going to come into the combine between 219 and 224, 225. Anything above 225 is a win, unless you test poorly. Anything below 220 is a bit of a loss, but people are more willing to play that hybrid player in those sort of 4-2-5, 3-3-5 kind of sets that some teams do play nowadays in the NFL. The other player who I think has at least a better than 50% chance of making a 53-man roster who played for Vanderbilt. And once again, Corday Sender is a guy who doesn't have a truly defined role as a defensive lineman at the next level, but he has enough ability, enough size, though you'd like to see him put on a little bit of weight, but he's probably the best pure athlete on the entire roster. And he has, like I said, an opportunity to make a team. Things to note about him, he doesn't produce what you'd like to see him produce. You'd like to see a guy like him consistently dominate competition, even in the quote-unquote SEC, as people like to point out. And then I'll jump back over to Georgia Tech, and then we'll talk a little bit about the game itself. as I said, suiting up for Georgia Tech, they have a few more guys. They have at least one running back who I think has a really good chance to make an NFL roster. They may have a receiver who can play at the next level. I'm fascinated by Haynes King. I'm not one of those people that thinks he's a non-prospect, right? I don't think I'm not going to commit to him, right? But I'll start with probably the highest rated, or one of the highest rated players is Jackson Hawes. Jackson Hawes, another tight end, and can get down the seam, blocks more than well enough, especially for today's standards of blocking amongst tight ends. Once again, 1974, you might have considered a below average blocker, but for 2024-25, more than adequate as a blocker, and can run a little bit. Then Jamal Haynes, right, is another guy, because he has versatility as well as pure athletic ability. He has a real chance to stick on an NFL roster because there's a place for guys like him. He can play multiple positions. He can return kicks. He can play as a traditional, true running back. He can line up in the slot. He can do a little bit of everything that you need to see from the quote-unquote modern third down back, right? That's probably what he's going to be. Could he do more than that? Possibly. But I think he's seen as a third down back, and there's a market for that. There's a good, solid market for third down back types in the NFL. And a few other players that I could potentially see as late draftable, or at least, make a team as prior to undrafted free agents. And yeah, I mean, you know what? I'm not going to sneak away or shy away from talking about Haynes King. Haynes King, was a legitimate big-time prospect. And while he still hasn't developed quite to the extent as a passer that you might ideally want to see, if I'm sitting there middle of the 6th round and I don't like my backup quarterback situation, I'll throw down, bring me Haynes King. Malik Bradford, right? Malik Bradford is once again, not a slam dunk. He's a guy that not everybody's going to like. He's not everyone's cup of tea, or whatever term you want to use to describe what he is or what he might be. But Malik Bradford has enough ability that I think some NFL team is going to be interested enough in him that will take a look at him as a possible NFL prospect. Other things about him, did he produce quite the way I was expecting or hoping? I thought he'd put up bigger numbers this year, but he's got enough of what you need. He's got enough of what you're looking for, that there's an NFL future for him. If not as a pure wide receiver, then once again as a guy that can maybe do some things in special teams. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he actually gets a shot to be more than just a special teamer. Other things to know about him. I think the big question mark about him will be time speed. And that's a big question mark about most, unless they have like a strong background, most of the wide receivers in not just this class, but any class, because everything is guesswork. You hear lots of rumors about what someone ran at this camp and what they did here and what they did there. But he's a smaller receiver. He's probably 5'8" and 3/8. He's probably 171 pounds, which is fine if you're fast. If you run in the mid 4.5, that's not great. But his season, right? So this past year, 670 yards receiving, 3 touchdowns, with a long reception of 52. I thought he would be 300 or so yards above that. I thought he would, long 52 is fine. And I thought he'd have probably double the number of touchdowns. So that means he's probably, once again, a guy who's going to be picked up as a priority undrafted free agent, most likely. And then last, but certainly not least in my mind, amongst the Georgia Tech players. And they have a corner that I think is an NFL corner. And Mr. Burrell, unlike some of the other guys, is the right size, shape, speed, whatever things you're looking for. A few other guys that I'm going to mention. Dominic Blaylock, another wide receiver, has some size to him. More of a possession type. Probably going to come in at 6 feet and a half inch and 202 pounds. Probably going to run 4.56. Anything below 4.5 is a big win for him. Anything above 4.6 is a big loss for him. And then Mr. Carroll, right? Last but not least is Trey Cooley, and he's another one of the running backs. I think that he's going to be another medium-sized guy with medium speed, probably undrafted free agent. But Mr. Burrell is probably the Georgia Tech player with the clearest path, Warren Burrell, the former Tennessee player, to being drafted, especially since he has size, right? When you're over 6 feet tall, and I think he's going to come in slightly over 6 feet tall, maybe 6 feet and an eighth, maybe 6 feet and a quarter, 191, 192, 194, somewhere in that low 190s, which is basically perfect corner size. If you run sub 4.5, anything sub 4.5 is a win, anything over 4.5 is a bit of a loss, and if he runs above the mid 4.5s, it's a big loss, probably pushes him out of the draft. But Haynes King is a big, strong kid with mental and physical toughness. And if you're not sure he's a quarterback, once again, maybe he can make that Scott Frost switch over to safety, maybe even linebacker, but probably more like safety or maybe a running back. I don't know. I think he'd be wasted at running back. I would bring him in as a quarterback, and you have to prove to me he can't play quarterback. Once again, Bill Carroll for Ziddy62 Media, and I'll be giving you a preview of the players in the games all the rest of the bowl season.